And with that, I would like to invite our moderator, Dr. Francesco Sindico of the Strathclyde Centre of Environmental Law and Governance, to take it away and start the panel. Many thanks, Dr. Sindico, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Francesco Sindico. I am the founder and co-director of the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance, and I will be moderating this exciting session on economy and sustainability. We have some great speakers with us, which I will present in just a second. I will be giving a bit of an introduction also about my work and some of the work that we're doing with Island Innovation, just to give some general flavor and some general context. And I will then give the floor to Curtis Dickinson, the Finance Minister of Bermuda, who I'll introduce in just a second. And he will have 10 minutes to give a presentation. And then we will go immediately to some questions to the minister, since he unfortunately will have to leave us before the end of the session. We will then go to our colleague from Sao Tomé and Príncipe. And again, after his presentation, we will have some time for some questions directed directly to him. We will then have a video from our colleague from Timor-Leste, and then we will open it to some Q&A. But again, before I introduce the excellent and distinguished speakers, let me just say a little bit about myself and the work that we're doing with Island Innovation. I'm the director of SCELG, the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance. My background is very much in public international law, climate change law, international water law, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we always work not just in academia, but also with governments, also with international organizations and civil society. And this is very much how we started working in the area of island law and policy. While I am not an islander myself, I am based in Glasgow. I am originally from Italy. In 2019, we collaborated with Scottish government in the development of the National Islands Plan, which stems from the Islands of Scotland Act. That was an amazing experience that allowed us to really get to under the skin of the legislation and the policy of Scotland and Islands. But the year afterwards, obviously, the pandemic kicked in, started, and that's where we really started collaborating with Island Innovation. And with Island Innovation, we undertook and carried out a global survey of how islands around the world were dealing with COVID-19. This led to a final report and to really understanding what were the key fragilities, the key issues that were happening on islands around the world in the context of the global pandemic. And I will put some links in the chat once I finish speaking. But we are now over a year after the pandemic started, and SCELG and Island Innovation have moved on and are working together with other partners in exploring how we can get towards a more resilient and more sustainable future, which very much links to the topic of economy and sustainability of today's session. Our main partner here is the University of Prince Edward Island Institute of Island Studies. And together with them, we have established the COVID-19 Island Insights series, where we are looking at 25 islands around the world, some in the Caribbean, some in the Atlantic, some in the Pacific, and looking very closely at their recovery packages and really understanding whether they're going in a way that we could consider of building back better. And I will explain what I mean by that in just a second. Our final goal is to come together with our partners and develop some policy recommendations for greater resilience and sustainability. We're doing this with the insights, which again, I will put the link in the chat in just a second. We're having a workshop in May where we're fledging out these policy recommendations, and then we will be meeting with island policymakers and stakeholders to discuss the suggested policy recommendations. So a big shout out to people in the participants group or in Island Finance Forum, that we would be delighted to work with you, because obviously the policy recommendations are only valid if they are understood and really rubber stamped by those who are making the decisions on islands and for islands. Now, the results of this big project will be presented at COP26 in Glasgow in November, so the International Climate Change Conference. I am based in Glasgow. We are organizing a number of events, some of which are also focused on island sustainability at COP26. So again, between the participants and the audience and the distinguished speakers, if anybody wants to know more about what we're doing at COP26, check the chat. Once I finish speaking, I will put some links there. Now, moving to today's presentation and today's session. I believe it's really about this idea of building back better. We have been hit by a pandemic. A lot of us have said, I've heard it in other sessions of the Island Finance Forum, it has given us an opportunity to reflect, to stop, and to think how island societies, how island economies can actually move in a different, in a better direction. But I think this session does give us some food for thought and some challenges as well that can be surmounted, can be dealt with, but need to be discussed. So for example, how do we build back better in an island society where, for example, tourism may not be as developed, may not be as mainstream as on other islands? We often think of islands as the place where tourism is the main economy or one of the main economies. That may well be the case even for some of the islands that we will be discussing today, but not all of them. So how do we engage with tourism in this case, or just some sectors when they are not the main ones? The second is, if we want to go down the route of a more sustainable future, a cleaner future, a greener future, we also have to take into account that for some islands, the exploration of oil and oil reserves has been incredibly instrumental and positive in many cases for their economic development. So how can we move, if not away, how can we work together with socio-economic patterns and practices that are already there? And lastly, what is the role of public-private finance? Let's remember, this is the Island Finance Forum. So how do we attract public-private finance flows that are linked to the international climate change process? Remember COP26, Glasgow, and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, to talk about all of this and more, we have three distinguished and excellent speakers from the three following islands. From Bermuda, a British overseas territory, we have Curtis Dickinson, the finance minister, which I will give the floor in just a second. We then have from the island of Sao Tomé and Príncipe, an island nation in the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, Minister Osvaldo Tavares Vaz, Minister of Finance, Planning, and the Blue Economy. And from Timor-Leste, one of the most recent independent states of the world, back in 2002, an island that shares a border with Indonesia, we will have a recorded video from Minister Rui Augusto Gomes, the finance minister. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Minister Curtis Dickinson. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us today. I will give you the floor, and I will then ask everybody in the audience to use the Q&A box if you have any specific question that you want to pose to the minister, and I will pose them to the minister after his presentation. Minister, the floor is yours. Can you please unmute yourself, Minister? Sorry.
How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. I am pleased to have the opportunity to join my esteemed ministerial colleagues from Timor-Leste and Sao Tomé and Príncipe at this ministerial roundtable. I would also like to thank the organizers of this Island Finance Forum for the invitation and to provide an update on Bermuda's work to address the health, fiscal, and economic challenges that have resulted from the COVID-19 crisis and to ensure future economic sustainability and stability. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on the global economy and has prompted governments worldwide to take unprecedented actions. To support their economies, governments have had to enact massive fiscal responses, with early estimates suggesting that these have totaled nearly $14 trillion, or approximately 14% of global GDP in 2020. As a result of the public health measures necessary to contain the spread of the virus, the International Monetary Fund expects the world economy to contract by approximately 4.5% in 2020, a decline not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The impact on countries such as ours, consistent with other countries, has been significant. In Bermuda, with the onset of COVID-19 in March of 2020, the government moved quickly to take action to protect the country on the health front. This included providing emergency funding to the Ministry of Health to fund personal protective equipment, testing kits, and testing equipment, among other things. Lockdown measures were quickly implemented and then, over a period of time, gradually eased as the mitigating actions taken to contain the virus began to have positive results. We are indeed grateful for the tireless work done by our healthcare and other essential workers, and for the support received from the people of Bermuda who have played a positive role in the fight against this insidious disease. It has been a tremendous battle, one which we are still fighting, and it is not surprising that the necessary measures to protect the health of our people has in turn had a severe economic and financial impact. In addition to addressing matters relating to the health and safety of our people, decisive and timely action was therefore also taken to assist individuals and businesses that had an immediate need for financial relief, and the government therefore instituted several temporary emergency measures. In this regard, we assisted employees through the emergency development and implementation of an unemployment benefit program that at its peak assisted approximately 1/3 of our workforce. Measures were also taken to assist businesses, which included extending deadlines for tax filings and the deferring and waiving of fees, taxes, and penalties. As the pandemic continued, legislative amendments were enacted that allowed persons to make withdrawals from their pensions to meet the unexpected financial challenges. Overall, the government's initial emergency economic support totaled approximately $127.2 million in fiscal year 2020-2021. This included more than $60 million in the unemployment benefit programs, $12 million in financial support to small and medium-sized businesses, and additional funding for COVID-19 related health costs. Despite resilience in our international business sector, Bermuda's GDP is expected to contract by approximately 9% in 2020, as sectors such as tourism and hospitality, which are particularly important for the employment of Bermudians, have been severely affected. Anticipating the significant decrease in revenues and increases in expenditure, the government therefore took decisive action to reduce spending. Further, as part of our fiscal management program, in August of 2020, the government successfully accessed the international capital markets to fund expected current and future deficits and to control interest costs. As a result of all the actions taken, the originally estimated deficit of just $19.8 million for 2020-2021 translated into an actual deficit of $245.5 million. To address the fiscal and economic challenges facing our island home, government, with advice and support from its industry partners and its well-developed network of internal and external advisors, developed its plan for economic recovery. The development of the economic recovery plan was a whole of government approach, which incorporated detailed inputs from around the cabinet table and across the various ministries of our government. It is, in our view, ambitious, but achievable. It combines fiscal responsibility with a clear path to growth, employment, and greater economic equity. Derived from the government's 2020 election platform and its November throne speech, and informed by leading practices from similar economies and the latest insights taken from successful COVID-19 recovery strategies internationally, our plan is structured to deliver an economy that will work for all. In developing the economic recovery plan, the government has been guided by 6 key principles. 1, combating the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 as a priority. 2, reducing the cost of living. 3, achieving fairness and equity. 4, financial viability. 5, fiscal prudence. And 6, timely, decisive action. A 3-phase approach has been taken in relation to our ERP. The first phase addressed the preparatory work of setting the objectives and principles, and was followed by the more in-depth work to develop the plan. This phase included developing an economic model and the set of fiscal guardrails to keep Bermuda on a prudent fiscal path. The developmental phase also included the agreement of the initiatives that would be the focus of the economic recovery plan implementation work. Having developed what is referred to as an ERP blueprint, we are now embarking on the implementation phase. The ERP contains 31 priority initiatives to accelerate medium-term economic growth, which, as noted earlier, are consistent with the government's 2020 election platform and November throne speech. The range of policies compare well with emerging pandemic responses from similar economies, with many of the policy measures being undertaken in peer countries also featuring prominently in Bermuda's platform. These include support for specific sectors and economic diversification measures, labor market interventions, and efforts to accelerate digital transformation. Additionally, Bermuda's ERP has set out a desire to go further in areas such as environmental sustainability and economic equality and empowerment, as well as catalyzing and mobilizing external investment to accelerate growth in key sectors. Key healthcare issues are also addressed in our ERP. The priority initiatives outlined in the ERP have been developed alongside several parallel and substantive initiatives that are underway and will have positive impact on the Bermudian economy. These include education reform, tax reform, pension reform, as well as additional policies to support Bermuda's international business sector, including in the highly competitive search for climate-related financial opportunities. International benchmarks suggest that with the successful implementation of these 31 priority initiatives, Bermuda should look to expect an increase in GDP of 1.3 to 1.5% per year, above baseline economic growth from 2023. Implementation of the ERP will be coordinated and led by a new and dedicated team within the Cabinet Office, reporting to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Development and the Premier. Strong support and appropriate additional resourcing are critical to ensuring this team is successful and is currently being addressed. In closing, I would again like to thank the organizers of this forum for the invitation to participate in this event. While the future remains deeply uncertain and economic risks are mostly on the downside, it is our view that Bermuda's ERP provides a blueprint for a successful recovery. However, effective implementation is now critical for us to ensure that Bermuda maintains fiscal prudence and forges a new path to growth, employment, and greater equity. My best wishes to all of my colleagues as they too undertake their work for a brighter and better future for their countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Dickinson. That was incredibly well laid out, let's say, picture of not only the way Bermuda is recovering from COVID-19, but also the ERP, the Economic Recovery Program, the principles that it has, and where it wants to go. And I really feel, after having heard your talk, that Bermuda is taking the opportunity to move in a direction that will make it an even better place than it was before. And I'm sure the people in Bermuda hope that, and I'm really hoping that that will be the case. Now, there is a question for you in the Q&A box, which I will refer to you. But before that, I just wanted to ask you one quick thing. Amongst the six pillars that you mentioned of the Economic Recovery Program, there's one that, and I'm the first one to admit that although there are commonalities with islands, at the same time, islands around the world have their own uniqueness and their differences. But the second one was reducing the cost of living. And I wondered whether this had to do also with housing, because housing is a huge problem, even here in Scotland with Scottish islands. And I know that in several islands around the world, the cost of living often relates to the problem with housing. So I was just wondering whether you can expand, for my own benefits and for the participants, that second particular principle, reducing the cost of living. What is the main challenge there? And is housing an issue? And then I'll move on to the questions that I see in the Q&A.
Well, I'm not sure if many of the attendees today know much about Bermuda, but we are an island at our widest, 1.5 miles wide, and the length of the island is about 20 miles, so about 24 square miles in area. There are about 60,000 people here, so space is somewhat limited. And as a result of basic supply-demand characteristics, lots of demand, very little supply, you see the impact in movement in price. So housing is a challenge, along with a number of other things. Because of our fairly remote location, we're 700 miles east of the North Carolina coast. Most things here have to be imported. And so the cost of importing goods adds to the cost of living. And so what we see as the principal kind of cost for people are their housing costs. And those are demonstrated through either the rents or the cost of acquiring a home, through the cost of the financing of those homes for those who purchase, so mortgage costs, then the cost of food, and the cost of healthcare, because healthcare, I think for most countries, has been a bit of a challenge with the growing rate of cost. And so housing is a challenge. The government does have an authority that is responsible for trying to find ways and implement strategies around lower cost housing. But lower cost housing in Bermuda is a relative concept to that of lower cost housing in other places. And so it's a continuous challenge that we continue to try to address. But housing is among those challenges.
Thank you very much. I'll now move on to the questions that you can also find in the Q&A. And if you scroll down to the bottom, the first one comes from FTech, and it has something to do with the relationship between the economy and the environment. And the question is, has Bermuda explicitly considered the environment in its COVID response? And it goes on to ask whether it has done so in a multifaceted form. So understanding what impact economic development will have on the long-term environmental and economic sustainability of Bermuda, but also to consider the environment as a recipient of economic stimulus. And before I give you the floor to answer, yesterday I had the opportunity to, for example, attend the session on e-mobility. And I was very pleased to hear that in Bermuda, for example, there is a lot of attention for the electrification of the both private fleet and the public transport fleet. And that seemed to me that really to highlight Bermuda as a laboratory of innovation, let's say, as a place where climate change is taken seriously. But I'll let you answer FTEC's questions if you can.
Sure. I would say that the easy answer to the question was the environment is part of our COVID response. I would say no, because the environment is part of our everyday existence. We are doing work now cataloging all of the environmental initiatives that we have been doing over the course of the last 30 to 40 years, because I think the environment is an issue that has certainly come to fore more prominently of late. But we are an island, we're surrounded by water, we're remote. We do suffer from hurricanes almost every season. And so the issues of climate and the environment are very important to our very existence. Add to that, we are also one of the world's capitals for insurance and reinsurance. And so a number of our critical stakeholders are affected by the changes that are going on with respect to the environment. We've seen severe incidences of very, very bad weather and bad impacts on states along the east coast of the United States. We've seen wildfires both in Europe and in the west coast of the United States. Well, our insurers are the ones who principally insure claims that result from those tragic occurrences. And so we are in some ways have made a decision by virtue of where our geography, how we're located geographically, but also because we are a center of innovation around financial services and insurance. We have been responsive to the industry stakeholders who are so critical to our economy. And if it's important to them, then it's important to us.
Mm-hmm. I'll now move to a question from Stacy Alvarez, is on the top of the Q&A. And she's asking something that I think is relevant, not just for Bermuda, but for many islands. That it's something that is coming out also from our island, from our COVID-19 Island Insight series. What specific measures were geared towards helping the most vulnerable in society, such as the disabled, those struggling with psychological mental disorders, single parents, et cetera, et cetera? And if I might just expand on that, I think one question is, in looking ahead, and I think you mentioned you wanted a Bermuda that works for all. How is that fairness, equity, and as a lawyer, I would also add the argument of a human rights focus. How is that brought in the recovery plan?
Well, you know, our government before, I would like to think that our government before the pandemic was responsive to the needs of all of our citizens. I would say that the pandemic has certainly gone some way to kind of highlight some issues more than others before. I can tell you that when we took the decision early on that we were going to close our island down, we decided that all workers, irrespective of whether they were highly compensated or not, and all workers ultimately did not apply for the benefit, but all workers were provided with the opportunity to apply to the government for support. We've certainly had to enhance resources around mental health. We've had to enhance funding to support those persons who, we have a fairly small homeless challenge, people who don't have regular way homes. We've had to kind of assist those charities that provide those services. And we've had to kind of open our minds and our hearts and quite candidly, the checkbook to ensure that people were not going to be suffering from this pandemic unnecessarily, because that was the right thing to do. I think we like to take the view, irrespective of political parties, that we are one island, and that we are committed to ensuring that all of us live a proper quality of life. And so we have implemented policies and taken certain actions to ensure that those who are less fortunate are taken care of.
There are a lot of questions, and I know that the minister has to leave us. So I hope you don't mind if I just ask maybe two more, and I ask them together and give you just a little bit of time to reply to those questions. And then we will move on to Minister Osvaldo Tavares de Vaz from Sao Tomé and Príncipe. The two questions I would like to ask you, Minister, are the following. The first one comes from Elive Pelletier, and he's asking from an educator, I'm interested to hear what are the exact plans your government has in mind for education reform, and how does the government intend to move that reform forward? Now, I'm not aware of the Bermuda education systems, so I don't know whether he's referring to maybe more online because of the COVID situation, or education more generally. The second point I'd like to ask, because I think this again is an interesting point also from a comparative perspective, comes from Adnan Hassan. And he's asking, when the minister mentions peer reference, does he just use Caribbean islands, or does he use islands around the world for his comparators? What are his comparators? And that, I think, is an interesting question. When we're looking at good practices elsewhere, do we tend to stay in our own region, or do we look as far as possible and try to, understand that narrative, that story from an island, even if it's from the other side of the world, let's say? So the education question, and then the idea of looking for good practices elsewhere and where. And I will finish with that, and then move on to the second speaker. Minister.
Sure. So on the first question with respect to education, our reforms are targeted at getting better outcomes for our students. Before I became the Minister of Finance, I was a professional, I was a banker. And I've always made the case, and I actually am a former chairman of the Board of Education for a period of like 5 years. And I was interested in education, one, from a personal perspective, because it was the thing that moved me from being at risk to being having some success in my life. And I'm the beneficiary of a very good system, and then further education in the United States and onward. So our intention is to get better outcomes, and the reforms that are currently going on are designed, one, to ensure that the structure that we have in place around education, not just the buildings, but actually the way education is organized, is intentional in helping to have students achieve the best outcomes for themselves. And that extends from those who may not be particularly academically inclined and more technical in nature, to those who are high flyers and will pursue with some ease a more rigorous academic curriculum. The reforms are also intended to enforce more accountability into the system. Accountability for students, accountability for teachers, accountability for the educational leadership, and accountability for parents. And so it is trying to bring the entire ecosystem together with the benefit of collaborating for the benefit of the students. We as a jurisdiction have, I would say, benefited significantly by having financial services decide to locate themselves here and operate here. It is a very competitive business that is still today, even post-pandemic, we are still seeing a number of startups wanting to invest their capital here because of the quality of the intellectual capital that sits inside of Bermuda. For our own survival and our own succession, we need to ensure that we have a plentiful supply of resources coming behind the existing crop of people who actually populate seats inside of these businesses. And we understand that for our own survival, we need to make the right investments in education to ensure that we have a continuous flow of resources who can keep the companies that we have here and contribute greatly to our economy, wanting to stay here. The second question, I've forgotten part of it, so if you wouldn't mind repeating it, I can answer that one for you.
It was a more general question on when you look at comparators, when you look at peer review to some extent, whether it's just the islands of the Caribbean or any island, wherever it is.
We cast a fairly wide net, and I'll tell you why. We are, as I mentioned before, 700 miles east of the east coast of the United States, and are significantly influenced by things that happen in America, just by virtue of its proximity. Similarly, we are a UK overseas territory, and so a lot of our people are educated in the UK. We take a global view, and we look at practices of countries all around the world, and we try to understand how those practices could potentially benefit Bermuda. We don't just look at the Caribbean or just island nations, although it depends on the issue. We try to be open-minded and try to find the best solution for Bermuda. And sometimes those solutions may be ones found in island nations, Caribbean nations, or on a broader scale, the world. But we don't limit ourselves. We try to find the best, and then we try to emulate it.
Minister, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for reaching us today. I understand there were some logistical issues to get you in front of a computer, but thank you so much for making it. I understand you will have to leave us, but I'm sure we got, and the participants will agree, a lot from your presentation, a lot from your discussion, and I wish you and the government in Bermuda and the people in Bermuda well, and I will now move on to our second speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
So I move on now to present our second speaker, who hails from the island of Sao Tomé and Príncipe, an island nation in the Gulf of Guinea in the West Africa. Honorable Osvaldo Tavares Vaz is the Minister of Finance, Planning, and the Blue Economy. And we'll do just like we did before. I will give the minister the floor. And after his presentation, we will open it to Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. I do apologize for those that I could not call out and shout out to the minister, but there were so many that it was impossible. But I'll do my best to get the same questions to the minister, Osvaldo Tavares Vaz. So, Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oui, merci. Je vais parler français. C'est possible? S'il vous plaît. S'il vous plaît, je vais parler français.
Je peux faire le possible pour le traduire, mais le français, c'est pas parfait. Donc...
Moi, je parle portugais, mais français.
Portugais, well, ce que tu veux. Ce que vous voulez. Si vous voulez parler français, je peux essayer de le traduire en anglais
oui.
Un petit peu,
ou
en portugais.
En portugais, oui. Mais je vais parler portugais.
Et moi, nous pouvons aider même en portugais.
Oui. Je vais parler portugais.
Je veux seulement le dire à les participants, cher ministre, je veux seulement le dire aux participants. So, dear participants, just an organizational aspect. So the minister will be talking in French and maybe something in Portuguese. Between me and James, we'll do our best to provide not a word-to-word translation, because that would just not be possible. But at some points, I'll ask him to stop, and I will try to give you a flavor of his presentation in English for those who cannot follow either French or Portuguese. Probably I'll ask French. I guess amongst the participants, it's more likely that people may be able to speak French. So, le ministre, cher ministre, si vous pouvez le parler en français, ça serait fantastique.
Oui. Mais je vais parler en portugais parce que beaucoup de personnes ici ne parlent portugais. C'est très important pour tout le monde.
Ça va.
Oui.
Ça va.
La langue de Sao Tomé et Príncipe, c'est portugais. Oui, merci. Bem, eu sou Osvaldo Vaz, como já foi apresentado, Ministro do Planeamento, Finanças e Economia Azul. Estamos a falar de São Tomé e Príncipe. São Tomé e Príncipe, duas pequenas ilhas no Golfo da Guiné, em África, com cerca de 200 mil habitantes e que, efetivamente, são duas ilhas insulares e dois países que está banhado pelo Oceano Atlântico.
If I could just translate, the minister's introducing himself, explaining that Sao Tomé is made up of two islands in the Gulf of Guinea, off the west coast of Africa.
Para informar de que a nossa economia é pequena, ela é fundamentalmente turismo e agricultura, mas, como é do conhecimento, por causa da pandemia, o turismo fracassou significativamente e isso afetou muito a economia do país.
The minister represents finance, planning, and the blue economy, and is explaining that the tourism industry made up a significant part of the country's economy and has, of course, failed to contribute over the last year.
Mas por causa dos apoios dos nossos parceiros, nomeadamente FMI, Banco Mundial, BAD, China, União Europeia, independentemente da previsão negativa que foi feita pelas essas instituições, de que teríamos decréscimo de 5,3% em 2020, o país conseguiu ter crescimento econômico de 3,1% em 2020.
Last year, the country made a economic growth, I believe, of 3.1%.
A nossa taxa de inflação foi de 9,4%, é claro, superior ao de 2019, mas mesmo assim é menos de 2 dígitos.
Por favor, siga. Não estou tradutor profissional, assim não entendo tudo, mas siga.
Vou dizer que a taxa de inflação em 2020 foi de 9,4%. É o contrário, pouco superior a 2019, que foi de 7,7%. Mas mesmo assim, tivemos uma taxa de inflação menos que 2 dígitos.
The rate of inflation is less than 2 digits. There were some statistics there. Apologies, I'm not able to translate all of this. Thanks for your patience, everyone, and hopefully you can understand parts of this. Francesco, if you could also type in anything into the chat as well to help explain, that would be wonderful.
Bom, e nós, quanto à pandemia, ela está controlada. Nós tivemos apoios de OMS, Unicef e o Banco Mundial. O país já recebeu 24 mil doses de vacina COVAX de AstraZeneca e pensamos, com o apoio dessas instituições, vacinar cerca de 60% da população até final do ano 2021.
There's a goal to vaccinate 60% of the population by the end of this year, and there's been significant support from institutions to achieve those vaccinations and access those vaccinations in the country. The pandemic is under control in Sao Tomé.
Mas para nós, o ano crítico é o de 2021, onde o país está a sentir de facto os efeitos da pandemia, e para isso, como país insular, e que o turismo está parado, precisava-se de muito apoio para o setor privado nacional. Ou seja, o que São Tomé e Príncipe agora precisa é que haja efetivamente apoio ao setor privado nacional. Crédito bonificado para apoiar o setor privado nacional.
As an island country with significant dependence on tourism, there's a need for the rebuilding of that sector and also the building of a stronger private sector to support the economy. Muito obrigado, Ministério, por la exposição. É tudo agora?
Sim, por enquanto é tudo. Se
Okay.
quiser também pode falar em espanhol, pode falar em português, que eu entendo.
Muito obrigado. Francesco, if
Okay.
you
Yes,
like,
I'll take it from here, James. Thank you so much for helping out. E muito obrigado, Minister. So I will speak slowly in English. I hope that's okay, Minister. And if you have any problems...
Parle français. Pour moi, parle français.
Pour vous, je vais parler français.
Spanish, Francesco, I think he did say Spanish would be okay.
Or in Spanish, can I speak Spanish? Non, mais le français, ça va. Donc, je vais prendre des questions de participants et je vais les demander à vous et nous pouvons faire un petit peu de conversation comme ça. Ça va, ministre?
Oui. Je comprends.
Donc, je vais voir s'il y a des... Donc, so to the participants, if you do have any specific question about Sao Tomé and Príncipe and about the minister, please put them in the Q&A so I can pose them in French to the minister and we'll do our best to translate them. Donc, nous sommes en train d'attendre qu'il y a des questions pour les participants, mais j'avais une question moi-même, ministre, et ce que je vous voulais demander, c'est que la île de Sao Tomé et Príncipe a une ressource qui est très importante et qui est partagée avec la Nigérie, que c'est le pétrole. Et
oui.
Il y a beaucoup d'histoires sur ces recours. On a eu des négociations avec la Nigeria et tout ça. Mais bien, si on veut avoir un développement durable, un développement plus vert, je crois que c'est très difficile d'une mentalité européenne ou une mentalité qui n'est pas là-bas de dire « Oh, il y a le pétrole, on ne doit pas le toucher ». Parce que le pétrole, même s'il est mauvais pour le changement climatique, si on utilise les ressources financières qui donnent la vente de pétrole, peut donner beaucoup à une société. Et je crois, mais je vous demande à vous, si le pétrole joue toujours un rôle important dans le Sao Tomé et Príncipe, et s'il y a des politiques dans Sao Tomé et Príncipe pour développer des énergies renouvelables, des autres formes d'énergie qui ne sont pas seulement relatives au pétrole. Alors, si je me permets, je vais faire la demande très brièvement en anglais. De cette façon, le participant peut l'entendre. Ça va?
Oui.
So for the participants, what I asked the minister was that there's a long history of negotiations between Sao Tomé and Príncipe and Nigeria in relation to a number of oil fields that are found in the Gulf of Guinea. And oil has been not the main one, but one of the resources for Sao Tomé and Príncipe since its independence in 1978 to provide revenue to the society, to the economy. It had helped build hospitals, schools, and so forth and so forth. So I asked the minister whether in the post-COVID-19 recovery packages and the future of the island, there are any ways, well, first, is oil still a big issue in Sao Tomé and Príncipe? And whether there are policies where there are movements to go beyond oil. Let's put it like that. Donc, ministre, je vous demande la question et e j'espère votre réponse. Merci beaucoup.
Ok, muito obrigado. Como tinha dito, nós somos vizinhos da Nigéria, temos uma zona conjunta de exploração, que ainda não está a explorar petróleos, não é? Temos blocos de petróleo, mas pensamos que um dia venha a explorar petróleo. Pensamos. Estamos otimistas, porque quase todos os países da região estão a extrair petróleo, e acreditamos que nós também temos petróleo.
So the minister is confirming to the participants that, yes, it's true, we have shared petroleum operations with Nigeria, and that this is something that happens all across the region.
Nós, pela nossa pequenez, nós precisaríamos, independentemente de extrair petróleo ou não, precisaríamos de energias renováveis. Inclusive, estamos na negociação com o Banco Mundial para substituirmos a produção de energias fósseis por energias renováveis. Somos ilhas, queremos proteger a natureza, não é? É uma ilha verde, e então precisamos, independentemente dos petróleos, termos aqui no país energia limpa.
So the minister is saying that despite this reliance on petroleum in the past, they are well aware of the climate change reality, and they want to move towards a greener society, a greener economy, and are in talks with lenders like the World Bank and others to promote more renewable energy on the island.
Por sermos ilhas, neste preciso momento, não temos grandes recursos, e este negócio de energia pode não ser rentável ainda no país. Estamos a pedir aos nossos parceiros para nos darem donativos no sentido de produzirmos energia solar no país.
The resources are limited, but especially in rural areas, there is the potential, for example, for solar, renewables, and the likes.
E gostaria de aproveitar essa oportunidade de também apelar aqui, estamos em contactos, no sentido de quem puder ajudar São Tomé e Príncipe, no sentido de apoiar com donativos para a construção de energia solar, seria muito bom.
And the minister is making a plea, a call to participants to the Island Finance Forum. If there are people amongst the participants that work in this area of green energy, renewable energy, and are interested in investing and partnering with São Tomé and Príncipe, that they would be most welcome. OK. Donc, ministre, il y a des autres questions. Je vais demander un. Just a second. Seulement un second. Beaucoup de questions sont sur cette question de l'environnement, donc je ne vais le demander autrefois. Oui, il y a une question, c'est la dernière, que c'est en français dans le Q&A questions de Anton Xavier de Smilo, que je crois que c'est très intéressant. Et c'est quelles sont les attitudes des communautés locales à l'égard de l'idée de faire des investissements locaux dans les technologies vertes. Donc, je vais le traduire à l'anglais et après je vous donne la parole. There's one question, a lot of questions were about this green aspect of São Tomé and Príncipe, but one that I found particularly interesting, although all the other ones were also fascinating, come from Anton Xavier. And it's about the local community's attitude towards investments, not just from the outside of São Tomé and Príncipe, not just big investments from the World Bank, but also local investments in green technology. So this is what I have asked the minister. Ministre, je vous donne la parole.
Oui, merci. Obrigado. Bom, nós ainda estamos, a atitude da população local relativamente à economia verde, ela ainda é reduzida. Nós Estamos com um programa com o Banco Mundial na sensibilização para evitar o derrubo de árvores. Nós estamos com um programa de manter a sociedade sempre limpa e, por isso, como disse, nós temos dificuldades financeiras e precisamos de meios para implementar isto. Como sabe, a população ela é agrícola e também uma parte pescatória, mas para a economia verde há efetivamente muita evolução, mesmo na agricultura nós trabalhamos sempre com os produtos biológicos naturais.
The minister has replied saying that
nós precisamos, acima de tudo, de energia solar, de energia limpa, para evitar efetivamente e transmitir essa mensagem de economia azul às populações locais.
the minister has been replying saying that in the local areas, in the more rural areas, agriculture is a key area of the economy, and that it's not just about the energy, which definitely comes into the mix. And again, he emphasizes the importance of potential more solar energy, but also looking at agriculture in a biological way and really focusing on this relationship with nature and agriculture. Okay, donc, ministre, je vous remercie beaucoup pour la présentation et pour participer à la conversation. Est-ce qu'il y a un dernier mot, de dernière palabre que vous voulez donner aux participants avant de passer au dernier speaker?
Bem, eu queria simplesmente agradecer pelo convite que foi formulado a São Tomé e Príncipe, porque esta é sempre uma oportunidade de nós informarmos que São Tomé e Príncipe é um dos grandes países para o turismo, é uma das melhores paragens e que eu gostaria de apelar aos participantes para visitarem essas duas ilhas belas aí no Oceano Atlântico, no Golfo da Guiné.
Muito obrigado. So before we move on to the third and last speaker, he just wanted to send a warm last message to all the participants, reminding you of the great position and the success of São Tomé and Príncipe in many ways. And he hopes to see you once there is a possibility to travel again and to visit São Tomé and Príncipe to discover for ourselves how beautiful his island is. Okay, so with that particular part of the session, multilingual, we move back just to English. And I am going to ask our colleagues at Talent Innovation, James and Sarah, to play the recorded video from our third speaker. I'll remind you, this is from Timor-Leste. It's the Honorable Rui Augusto Gomes, the Finance Minister. And for those who just want to place Timor-Leste in the world map, we're moving more towards the Pacific. Timor-Leste has become independent in 2002, and it shares an island with Indonesia. So it's not an island nation, or it is, but it is also sharing that same island with Indonesia. I will ask James and Sarah now to play the video for us. Thanks.
Excellencies, fellow panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having included Timor-Leste in this Island Finance Forum. I'd like to have joined the forum according to the set time, but due to some urgent necessities and priorities of attending the government's recovery efforts to the recent flood, I have this message recorded instead. Let me start by saying that Timor-Leste is geographically half an island, sharing a land border with Indonesia and sharing sea borders with two big economies, namely Australia and Indonesia. As a young country, it has identified its development priorities, which includes sound financing supports to deliver the required economic infrastructure for growth and development. I would like to begin by talking a little bit on the economy today, covering macroeconomic situation facing the country and the efforts to recover the economy after COVID-19. And then I'll move on to the financial sector situation of the country, followed by highlighting some of its challenges, and then talk a little bit about the opportunities for inclusive economic growth and effective service delivery for poverty reduction. So let me start by saying that Timor-Leste is aspired to be a high middle-income country by 2030, where people have access to basic services, decent jobs, and income. In order to meet the aspiration, the country is committed to develop its key infrastructure, such as highways, ports, airports, electricity, water, irrigation, and schools, as well as to strengthen its private sector to invest in the productive sectors such as agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. This ambitious plan has been financed through a mixed of modalities, that is, from the country's own income or savings in the Petroleum Fund, as well as foreign loan and domestic revenues. The country is conscious of its excessive withdrawals from the Petroleum Fund, where it is financing about 85% of the budget. Since last year, the country has introduced fiscal reform that aims to increase its domestic revenue, currently 11% to the ideal of around 18% by 2023. This includes addressing the key challenges in strengthening business environment, as well as upgrading the payment system to an online system so as to save time and cost transactions, as well as to secure the revenue collection. The global pandemic has negatively affected our country. We import everything. The series of lockdown has disrupted the supply chain for goods and services. We have predicted a recession last year of close to 8%. And to address this problem, the government has approved a short to medium-term economic recovery plan with specific measures that aims to mitigate the risk of further spread of COVID-19, provide social protection to the population, and to recover the economy. We can say that Timor-Leste has a vibrant financial ecosystem, where there is a mix of banks, ODTI, and cooperatives providing financial services to the people. There are 4 foreign banks operating in the country and 1 state-owned commercial bank. There is 1 other deposit-taking institution, ODTI, and 1 big cooperative group, 2 international insurance companies, along with many community-owned microcredit groups across the country. Each of the formal financial institutions provides financial services, ranging from doing payments of salaries, wages, savings, loans, credits, and other forms of payments and transfers. As of 2018, a large proportion of the adult population, or around 65%, in one way or another, have had access to the financial services provided by the financial institutions, but most notably the National Commercial Bank, which has branches throughout 12 municipalities and 1 special administrative region. Ladies and gentlemen, despite of the presence of these financial institutions in the country, challenges remains in the country's financial sector. The majority of population still live outside the financial sector. There is high interest rates for private businesses, particularly those taking loans, and the slow rollout of online payment system to attend the citizens. Out of all the age groups, 35 to 77 years of age are the group of the population that have access to one or more of the financial institutions, whereas the greater number of Timorese population, which are from 30 years old and below, are still without banking services, or at least they have limited access to bank services and continuously using cash for transactions in the market. This missing opportunity, and compounded by the cash-based economy, has impacted on the implementation of government planned social protection scheme in times of pandemic. For instance, in the middle of last year, the Ministry of Social Solidarity found it very hard to roll out $200 subsidy to around 300,000 households across the country, given that majority of them do not have a bank account, where the transaction could have been done easily and instantly. Mobile banking is still a big challenge in the country, that it continues to force banks, bank account owners, including women, children and the elderly, to physically be present in a branch in order to have access to the services. Furthermore, credit to the private sector is continuously to be a challenging, as the private sector continues to find interest rates being too high, around 10 to 12%. This is partially due to the absence of lending collateral. Internationally, Timor-Leste still scores 20 out of 100 for getting credit in the World Bank's 2020 Doing Business report. As the country continuously without a clear land entitlement which can serve as collateral, majority of the loan goes to individual borrower against the businesses. Excellency, fellow panelists, esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen, despite the economic, fiscal and financial challenges, the financial sector still offers an attractive opportunity for future investments. The limited financing products to support the fledgling private sector requires creative actions from the financiers. For instance, rather than banks playing waiting roles for good business proposals, through the collaboration with business accelerators, banks can identify potential good business plan and provide financial product accordingly. Currently, there is a credit guarantee scheme that covers banks that provide loans to the productive sectors such as agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. There is higher chance to open up the scheme to cover other critical areas of the economy. Hence, there is an opportunity for financiers to expand their loan portfolio. For instance, the government can encourage insurance companies to provide products like life insurance and property insurance. There is an opportunity of investing in the young generation. There are a high percentage of youth population who are using modern technology. Since they are very savvy to new gadgets, financing companies can target the population to promote their financial technologies. And improved outline transactions not only break barriers for more inclusive and equitable access to financial services, but accelerate the economic activities towards growth, help businesses back to operate in the new normal. Ladies and gentlemen, with the opportunities on the table, on behalf of my government, I would welcome any interested investors who would consider to invest in my country, but more specifically in the financial sector. Thank you, and I wish all the participants a successful and fruitful forum.
So thank you very much to the Island Innovation team, to James and Sarah for playing the video from the Minister, Rui Augusto Gomes, Finance Minister of the Government of Timor-Leste. I am just going to wrap up now with some general observations that stem from this last presentation. But before that, and before I forget, I also want to thank the organizers for inviting me to moderate this session. I also want to share that my thoughts are with our colleagues and friends in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the wider Caribbean for the challenge they're facing with the eruption at La Soufrière. Timor-Leste as well has suffered very severe flooding. And that's one of the reasons why the minister couldn't be with us today. So my thoughts are also with him and with the people of Timor-Leste. So let me finish by highlighting some aspects of the presentation on Timor-Leste, and then saying just a few words about governance, about the title of this session, Economy and Sustainability, and finish up with the international processes that we are currently living in, climate and SDGs, and how this relates to economy and sustainability. But let's start with Timor-Leste. This is a very recent new country in a way, full of opportunities, full of possibilities. The minister talks of an aspiration by 2030 of achieving a number of goals. And clearly finance has a role in this. Having said that, I was struck by two statistics that, in a way, again, are worthy of being considered, and they're not insurmountable, but do require some attention in islands like Timor-Leste. The first one, again, the reliance on petroleum, the links with the petroleum present between Australia and Timor-Leste, a whopping part of the budget, of the public budget, relies on petroleum revenues, which is something that Timor-Leste is legitimately doing, but we'll have to consider how to take forward in the future. And the second, at some point, the minister says that we import everything. So there is a need to consider for countries like Timor-Leste, islands like Timor-Leste, how to proceed in that sense. Now, the three islands had different governance structures in a way, and I think governance is an aspect that one has to consider when developing recovery packages and just thinking of future policies for islands. We had the British overseas territory with some level of autonomy, quite a lot actually, but still linked to a sovereign nation, the United Kingdom. We then had two SIDS, if we want to call them like that, or large oceanic states, as some people prefer to call them, Sao Tomé and Príncipe and Timor-Leste, in different geographical contexts and different economic contexts. They are independent states, so they can take decisions, and they can, to some extent, because obviously we live in a globalized world, take a path that takes them forward. Now, the title of this session, Economy and Sustainability. I think, and I believe from what we have heard, that it shouldn't be a question of economy or sustainability. Going forward, the economy has to be sustainable. We have to be talking about sustainable development. And somebody in the chat mentioned blue, orange, societies, economies. I think green economies, we can bring all the colors of the rainbow if you want, but we really have to look at all the assets. And that's why I call them large oceanic states. The blue economy is really something that these island states or island jurisdictions will be looking at with great attention, even more than now in the future. And the last point I want to make is that all of this is interrelated to the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. In just a few weeks, the US is convening a high-level meeting of presidents and prime ministers that will really kickstart the momentum towards COP26 in Glasgow. And large oceanic states really have an important role to play, even if some people may consider, but they don't contribute that much to climate change. That may well be, but as large oceanic states, they have a huge stake to play and a huge clout to push in these negotiations and in these regimes. And I really look forward to working together with large oceanic states, both at government level and society level, to make Glasgow a success for them and not just for the negotiations. And this is very much where the COVID-19 Island Insights series that we are collaborating and running with Island Innovation and with the Institute of Island Studies at the University of Prince Edward Island wants to be part of. I will leave it with that. I hope you have enjoyed the session. I thank those in the chat that have thanked James and myself for the translation efforts. You will have seen that we are not official translators, but we are working hard towards it, I guess. And yes, so thank you very much for joining us. A big thanks again to James and all the team at Island Innovation for inviting me to moderate this session. And I look forward to the next sessions at the Island Finance Forum and for the virtual Island Summit, which has now become a staple moment in the year for all of us who work on islands or with islands. So thank you very much to everybody, and I will let you go 10 minutes before time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Many thanks, Francesco, for that excellent moderation of the panel, and for all of our audience for bearing with us while we dealt with the unexpected. Just a reminder, in 40 minutes, we'll have our next session, the future of innovative finance mechanisms for ocean conservation, and we look forward to seeing you in that session. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of today and tomorrow's events at the forum. Bye-bye.